What's up, everybody? Today, we're gonna be chatting through kind of bit of a tech demo for V35 project stuff. So got asked a lot at Cinegear, just kind of how we come up with our looks and what our process is. We want to do like a little bit more of a deep dive into the thought behind the V35 project and how we come up with some of our looks and take you through that process and just what we're doing to shape the looks for cinematographers. So in this video, we're gonna do just a little thing with a Canon CNE since we've got a couple tunings of these. So you might ask, well, how does this start when you talk about developing a look? Well, there's a couple ways. For any lens set, like say a Canon, that has a previous generation of lenses, a lineage, if you will, we usually draw from that because more often than not, the optical designs haven't changed an insane amount. And there's a little bit more to draw on in terms of usually color science and color cast pretty much stays the same through several generations of lenses. So with these CNEs, instead of picking an old set like Olympus, we went with something like the Canon rangefinders. Now, we decided on the rangefinders. We've already had a tuning of another set. We really like the rangefinders. There's quite a few sets out there. So what's next? Well, what we do now is we jump on this thing called the internet and we just start downloading and looking at tons and tons of source footage. We'll show you some clips while I'm talking about this, but we go through and we look at different focal lengths, different T-stops, different people sets, because some sets can vary. Obviously, that's the whole reason why we're doing V35 project. And we're breaking down optical qualities of these focal lengths at different T-stops and lighting scenarios and breaking down colors of flares, stuff like that. So once we've done that, we take a bunch of notes and see the things we like. Now, we use the term inspired by a lot when we're talking about our tunings because we don't fully try to emulate them because there's things about old lenses that we don't like. So we kind of pick the best qualities of those things that we like in those sets, and then that's the stuff that we try to print into the DNA on the new lenses. Now, for the rangefinders, for example, these lenses were always SLR lenses, and they were based off of photo design. So why does that matter? Well, that matters because they never had to be continuous because you're not taking pictures with multiple focal lengths. You take one with a 50, it ends up in a magazine. You take one with a 35, it ends up in a magazine. They don't need to match because they're completely different. So when we're going through and looking at all of the source footage to break down our looks, there's something that we find is that they're not consistent across a lot of focal lengths. Now, because of that creates problems for cinematographers because our needs as cinematographers are different than people who are taking photo. So with that, when we're looking at the rangefinders, what we ended up doing is finding the focal length that we thought had the best balance of character interest that would translate well to cinematography. So the 35 T15 was the lens that we really liked optically. So from there, we broke down all the characteristics of that lens, and that is what we decided to put in all of the focal lengths of the CNEs and left kind of all the other focal lengths off the table. So that's kind of why we say inspired by, because in what we're trying to solve with continuity, we don't always take one for one. Every focal length has to match another focal length because honestly, that's part of the problem of using vintage lenses when you're a DP is that there's just so much continuous problems across the old sets. So first and foremost, that's what we do. Now, when we're talking about sharpness, old lenses, and a lot of them, some better than others, as we get into higher resolution sensors, that resolving power isn't always quite there. So when we're talking about softness, that's what we're trying to do optically, soften the image, but still have as much of that resolving power as possible because we have to factor in that a viewer now doesn't watch the highest quality print on a movie screen. They are watching this over some sort of streaming platform. And we all know that when we stream, we compress. Sometimes once, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times before a viewer sees an image. Now, if you're somebody that likes to use filtration, if you're already using an old soft vintage optic and layer diffusion over it, by the time this gets squished down and compressed for a viewer, you might be left with a very muddy version of what you saw on set, and that might leave you feeling pretty sad. So that's why we've really thought about this as much as we could and why we source modern optics, because not only if you like our look, it still allows you to have a lot of the sharpness there and resolving power to still use filtration to shape your looks even farther and keep that look way further down the pipeline to give as much of your original intent to the viewer. Now, for me as a DP, that's incredibly important, and why, a large part really, why we have done the things we've done in starting with modern optics. So a lot of people ask, well, what are you doing? Well, we can't give away all of our secrets, but it's a lot of stuff that industry people know, plus some. We're messing with paint internally, we're messing with spacings of lenses, we're adding things in between element groups, messing with iris blade stuff. There are things that we are constantly trying to experiment with to get the look that we're trying to achieve from these old vintage sets. Now, some people might say, or expect maybe even, that these looks are gonna be extreme. But if you look at a vintage lens and you look at a modern lens, I mean, it's not a crazy difference. I mean, they have some more interesting flares and they're a little bit less contrasty and maybe some edge fall off happening. We're not trying to do something that is so wildly extreme that it takes a viewer out of the experience or makes your set hard to shoot on. We want to give you a look that is sometimes subtle, sometimes a little bit more so, like with the Nisi Athenas, say. There is no previous generation of a Nisi, so we're then looking at the Olympus OMs, so that look might be a lot more, extreme from a 1-to-1 where we started and where we finished, because there wasn't a place to start with in the Nisi family. So some might be a little more extreme, some might be less, some might be your flavor, some might not be. But that's why we're doing so much with all these lenses. Now, another example of what we do, let's say the CP3s. We want to emulate some standard speed stuff. Now, the standard speeds never really covered Super 35, but people used them on Super 35 a lot, and because of that, the image circle got really fuzzy around the outsides. So what we did, we liked that. We think that's really cool. So when we do our full frame CP3s to emulate the standard speeds, we add a ton of that edge fall off in the corners, basically to emulate the look of putting a standard speed on Super 35. So when we're talking about emulation or how close does it really come to vintage stuff, it's not like we're trying to get all the way there. We're trying to get you as close and give you the aesthetic that, all the best parts that we like, without taking some of the negatives behind. And that's what's really cool about this. If you really love that full-blown vintage look and you're fine with some of the sacrifices you need to make mechanically, T-stop, color matching to have that look, it exists in abundance in the market and it will always be there. We're just trying to bring in something that's, if you don't like those sacrifices and you want a good bit of that look, now you have an option in what we're trying to do. But because of this keeps things really fun, constant, and current to what the market is doing. So with that is just a big overview of kind of our ethos and our thought process behind our tuning and what goes into building a look into our lens, how we source, how we compile, and just overall, we like to work with today's cinematographer to really achieve the needs that we're all looking for when we're trying to add life to our images. So with that, thank you for watching. Check out the V35 project. If you aren't familiar with our lenses, go to the website v35project.com to learn more about what we're doing. Thanks, and we'll catch you next time.